It's a bit strange me not seeing the audience. That's a bit odd. And it's a bit strange for me to do a presentation with my slippers on, but that's a bonus. So I'm going to show you the first slide. This is Genesis 15:1. Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield. Now, if I was going to cheat, I could stop there, because in a sense, that is the answer. In all aspects of our life, if we remember the fact that our Father in heaven is there to protect us, that kind of solves an awful lot of problems. But it would be rather like somebody saying to you, well, all you've got to do is climb the mountain. Just get up that mountain and your answers will be there. We know the scriptures tell us the way. We know the scriptures contain the answer, but we have to find that personal journey to get there, for the scriptures to make sense to us, for them to become personal, for them to become meaningful. We often have to go through a lot of struggles in life, a lot of difficulties, sometimes a lot of pain. But this scripture is worth remembering. And if we insert our own names there, fear not, insert your name, I am thy shield. Those 7 words contain an awful lot of comfort. But I've got more to say, so let's go on. Okay, so let's have a look at anxiety from a kind of psychological perspective. We've called it anxiety in a changing world, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, about how things change and how quickly things change. Sorry. Okay. All change, every kind of change brings the level of anxiety to us, doesn't it? That's natural. I mean, I felt a bit anxious going to Sainsbury's for the first time in the lockdown. There's things going on which are different. So that's an expectation that anxiety is about how things are different than what we're used to. And change impacts on our ability to control our lives. It creates a new uncertainty, and sometimes it brings losses. All of you have been parents or grandparents will know that parenting is a process of change, how quickly kids grow up. From toddlers to older children to teenagers and so forth. That's managing that change. And sometimes, I'm sure as a parent, you may have wished your children to be young again, to have a day with them when they're 3 years old, or to go back in time, because that change creates a kind of sense of losing things that you liked, losing things that you enjoyed. And when we lose things and when things are different, there is a sense of we're kind of not in control. We're not as in control as we were. And that lack of control often is the trigger to the anxiety. When we feel that we're not able to predict or to manage our surroundings or our feelings, then that creates the anxiety. That starts an anxiety process. Okay, let's look at different types of anxiety. Now, there's personal anxiety, things that happen to us as individuals. And you see that list there: moving house, new job, relationships, new baby. That's actually the 4 most stressful things people do in their lives. And we know that those 4, relationships, could be marriage, it could be separation, divorce. Those 4 things create the most stress for all of us. So, but they're not all necessarily negative things. They could be, they might not be. They're a mixture, but they certainly are profound changes where we have to reassess how we manage them, how we control them. Many years ago, when I was working in London, I had a client come to me, and in the first session, he told me that he was currently starting a new job. He'd just finished, I think it was a PhD. He was starting a new important job. He was going to be getting married in the next few weeks, and his fiancée and himself had just put down mortgage on a new house. And because of certain things, they were planning to start a family pretty quickly. He was going to do all 4 of those things. And then the next thing he said to me, he said, and by the way, I'm going to be 50 next week. So if you can do all those things at 50, that's pretty good going, because that's a lot of change in one go. Now there's another type of change, and this is maybe more relevant to what's happening now, if I can get the right button. There we go. Now, that's a picture of the Young family. I don't know them, but you know, this is a nice family portrait taken in 1913. If you look at the picture, you know, there's 7 children. I think there's 4 girls, 2 boys, and a little baby. I'm not sure, probably a boy. I would guess that's a boy. And the ages of the children range from possibly 16, 17 to about, the baby looks about 18 months, something like that. And what's particularly, there's a nice little touch in this picture in that the mother who's holding the baby is more concerned about looking after the baby than having her photo taken, because she's looking down at the baby, checking that the baby's okay. Now, 1913 is an interesting date, because as you probably know, it's the year before the First World War starts. And the First World War in history is a significant date, because after the First World War, everything changes. The 20th century is a century of tremendous change in the world. Not personal change, but change in nearly every aspect of society. What we eat changes, what we wear changes, how we live, how we communicate. Huge advances in technology. If you think about that little baby in that picture, and possibly most of those children, they would have seen men walk on the moon. Now, in 1913, they could not have imagined that. They could not have possibly conceived of the idea of men walking on the moon. That change was huge, massive, and people lived through it. Those young boys would have potentially been in the Second World War. They would have lived through the First World War. They would have seen massive changes in society and in the world. And in terms of pandemics, as you know, in the last major pandemic was in 1918-19, they would have lived through that. So change in our surroundings has been enormous. It's been huge. 20th century was the century of dramatic change in the world. And prior to that, I think things have been pretty stable. Okay, let's have a look at recently, okay? In the last few years, and I was trying to think about probably in the last 3 years that we know of, there's been some pretty major changes. We've had floods. There was lots of reports of floods, wasn't there? There was terrorist attacks. There was a major terrorist attack, if you remember, in London, where 2 young people were killed. And actually a friend of mine, who I know quite well, had a connection to that attack, and he told me a lot of the details about it and what happened and so forth. We've had, does anybody remember Brexit? Now, it doesn't matter which side of the debate you're on, that's immaterial. The fact of the matter that Brexit isn't over, hasn't even happened yet. And then, of course, you know, the one we're kind of all in the middle of is the pandemic. Now, what's interesting about this is that the first 2, if you think about, there was a lot of floods over, I think, the summer and even the winter, autumn time, a couple of years ago, and terrorist attacks. They only happened to a very tiny percentage of the population. We hear about them, we see them on the news, but we don't experience them. They're not something that really we get involved with. Interestingly, Brexit has been an enormous debate that's been so filled the news, and practically every news report over the last 3 years has been about Brexit, but it hasn't actually happened. It's a kind of a non-event. It's how that event will happen rather than it actually happen. It's going to happen in the future. It's yet to be. The thing we really know about is the pandemic. We're really experiencing something. And what's interesting about the pandemic is we're experiencing it together. There's some advantages to that, isn't there? When it first happened, in the first couple of weeks, or the first week really of the pandemic, of the lockdown, what was interesting is it struck me that it was suddenly like every day was Christmas Day, but without the presents and the turkey. It was like the one day of the year, Christmas Day, where everybody's doing the same thing. You know, everybody's in their homes, roughly doing the same thing all at the same time. It's the one day of the year that happens. And the pandemic seemed to be a bit like that. In lockdown, we were all in our homes, roughly doing the same thing together. There was a sense of, you know, as the phrase goes, we're all in this together. And there's some lovely touches that have come out of this time of people considering their neighbours, getting in touch with their neighbours, supporting. We're in this as a people. There's that sense of unity. But the one thing, well, the reason why we're in lockdown primarily is that we don't understand COVID-19. If you read about it and look at it, you can see that it's something we really don't have enough information about. It's something very new. It's a very new type of COVID disease. It's very peculiar in the sense that lots of people can have it and have no symptoms at all. In fact, the vast majority of people will be absolutely fine with it. Yet the oddity about this particular illness is that some people will get it really, really badly. And that's what has kind of disturbed the whole world about this and why we've been in lockdown, because there's this element of unknown that we're not yet in control of. And when we talk about, you know, finding a vaccine and tests and so forth, we want to gain control of this thing, because then we're going to feel safer. Then our anxieties are going to be reduced. So that's kind of the thing about the pandemic, is it's the unknown quality of the thing, of the disease. Right, let's have a look at some psychology. Anxiety really is a sense of inner turmoil and dread. That's a rough definition of it. It's a sense of unknown, of dangers, possible dangers, and so forth. Some related emotions of fear. It's interesting that anxiety comes from the French. It has a French root, the word. And fear, the word comes from Anglo-Saxon. So like lots and lots of words in English, we have two words for the same thing. The only difference between fear and anxiety is we don't tend to say we have an anxiety of spiders. We tend to say we have a fear of spiders. And we don't tend to say we have an anxiety of snakes. We have a fear of snakes. So it's kind of grammatical, the way we make the difference between the two. So fear and anxiety are basically interchangeable. They kind of mean the same thing. Another related emotion is stress. And anxiety can create stress, and stress is really a sense of overload. It's a sense of having too much to cope with at once. And if we kind of take that back to the national state, we're having to cope with the pandemic, and my goodness, we've got Brexit coming up, and those Brexit talks have been going on in the background, believe it or not. So that's a concern for us as a nation, that there's two quite big issues that still have to be resolved. So stress is having too much to cope with. And equally, if we've got too much to cope with, that can lead to stress, and stress can lead to anxiety. Okay, another word is worry. Worry is a word we use in a slightly more, not trivial, but lighter way. We talk about, I'm worried about, you know, work tomorrow, rather than saying I'm really stressed or anxious about work. Those words carry more weight. Worry has kind of less impact. But the thing about worry is it has a tendency to be much more long-term and persistent. So while it may not have the same impact as anxieties may, it has a much longer tiring, fatiguing effect on us when we're worried about something over possibly months and years. Okay, all these things can lead to depressions. And depression really is a reaction to these things. The clue is in the word, to depress, to push down, to try to get away from, to try and put aside and ignore difficult, painful feelings. The problem when we put things away or trying to put them in a box or bottle them up is they don't actually go away. They're still there. So equally, depression can be a result of anxieties, fears, worries, stress. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. Right. Now, when we talk about anxiety, it's not a bad thing. It's not a single thing that we can put in the box of not good, because anxiety is necessary. It's quite a helpful emotion, because in the right setting, anxiety keeps us very safe. And if you think about when you drive in a busy road, or if you say you're walking on a cliff top, you need an element of anxiety. If you didn't have some anxiety, you wouldn't be as tuned into your surroundings, you wouldn't be as alert to any dangers, you wouldn't be as conscious of your surroundings, because that's what anxiety brings. It brings a sharpness of senses. So, you know, you want to feel a little bit anxious in certain situations. Actors will always say that when they have to go onto a stage, they want some nerves. They don't want to be in the position where they feel no nerves at all about their performance. They want to feel some nerves, because that's what keeps them sharp. You don't want to get rid of your anxiety, because that would lull you into a false sense of security, and that's when potentially bad things could happen. Actors forget their lines or don't do a good performance because they're too at ease. They're not sharp enough. So anxiety is not bad. It's just the amount of anxiety we are having to cope with. So excessive anxiety can be completely debilitating. And that's true of all emotions. We can apply that to stress, depression, all those things. They can completely overtake us. Right. So many other mental health problems, the damage to our well-being comes from too much negative emotion. It's that overwhelming sense of I can't cope, overwhelming sense of I'm really anxious about what's going to happen. I'm really anxious about my life, about my work, about my family. That when the feelings get to a kind of tidal wave effect, then they become all-consuming, and that's when they start to damage. We become flooded by anxious feelings. Then we become unable to cope. Then these other factors can kick in. If you feel overwhelmed by anxiety, stress kicks in, depression can kick in, and you get a vicious cycle effect. So this flooding of negative emotion also does something else. It will drive out what is positive, because you can't do those two things at once. You can't be anxious and in a good frame of mind. You can only be one or the other. So when you're in an anxious state, you're not being positive. You're not being able to function fully and as efficiently as you would otherwise. So it's in an anxious state, it's hard to give care to others. It's hard to be a carer, to look after your children, to look after your parents, or to be a good neighbour if you're in an anxious state. It's hard to learn when students, university students or people doing their A-levels, GCSEs, if they're in an anxious state, it will inhibit their ability to learn. You can't be free to learn when you're anxious. It slows you down. It also creates a lack of empathy. in an anxious state, you're focusing on yourself. It's much more difficult to focus on other people because the anxiety is quite self-consuming. It's about me and my feelings and how I am. And that's really important. And that doesn't allow you to think of others. So anxiety can become a preoccupation. It can overtake all areas of our lives, potentially. If you're in a severely anxious state, you're going to be anxious all the time. You're going to be anxious in every area. You know, when you wake up in the morning, when you have your breakfast, when you go to work, when you see your family, when you, whatever you're doing, that anxiety can be a constant preoccupational, it can be a background hum that never leaves. The other thing that's quite important to remember, well, I think we know this, that when you have strong negative emotions, it's very tiring. It's physically exhausting. It creates a nervous tension, stress, and it causes fatigue. You really do, it does sap your energy. And at times, strong emotions like anxiety or stress or depression actually burn calories. You're not exercising as such, you're not running around burning up calories, but the very nervous state is actually affecting your ability to have energy. It saps your energy, and bringing you down on a low energy level is also going to make the anxiety or the depression worse. Okay, so living with anxiety can also become a habit. Now, this might sound a bit peculiar, but unconsciously holding on to and nurturing, resisting letting go of it. And what I mean by that, people can get into the habit of being a certain way. If you've lived with anxiety, and it also applies to depression and stress and worry, if you've lived with a negative emotion for a very long time, it becomes part of your identity. And you can feel as if without it, you'll have nothing else. And I've met lots of clients who hold on to their negative emotions for fear of having nothing. Well, at least I've got the worry. At least I've got the fear. At least I've got this constant nagging feeling because I'm feeling something. And that's one of the bad habits that can come out of prolonged, persistent negative feelings. You start to identify with the feelings and feel that the feeling is actually you rather than something that you're experiencing, that you are the feeling, rather than that it's a feeling that can come or go, and potentially you can have other feelings, that negative feeling defines you. So you get to the point where people feel, I must deserve to feel this way. And if I deserve to feel bad, then I'm going to continue to feel bad. And that's a very dangerous trap to be in. When you feel you deserve bad things, you think you have to tell yourself that feeling can come from only one place, and it's not your Father in heaven. That's the plan of the adversary, to make you feel like you deserve nothing good. It's a good indicator. It's a good test of where the feeling comes from. What is this feeling making me feel? And that tells you where it comes from. Okay, so living with long-term anxiety leads to low self-esteem, poor self-image, and it can lead to other mental health problems. You know, depressions can develop and perpetuate, and there can be a continuation of a very downward spiral emotionally. So what we're saying is making a positive effort to manage negative feelings. And this word manage is really important, because we're not saying eliminate. I don't think you can eliminate, or you even want to eliminate, all anxieties. What we want to achieve is a safe management of negative feelings is vital, because it shapes the way we feel and think about ourselves. So it's like a coin. On one side, if you accept that you can fall into a deep anxiety or a state of anxiety or a state of poor self-image, if you can do that, then the other side of the coin is then you can come out of that. If you can get yourself, if you can fall into it, then you can climb out of it. So there's always a way back. And that goes against this idea that I deserve to feel like this. Because if you feel in a negative way, it's possible, and certainly I'm not saying it's easy or quick, but it's possible to turn that around. I want to talk a little bit more about that. And those of you who are Star Wars fans, here's a quote from Yoda: "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering." It's a nice little thumbnail sketch of what I've been saying. I don't know how many people of you know, but George Lucas, who came up with Star Wars, actually investigated the church. I think it would have been in the 70s. And some say, it is said, and I can't say this is definite, that Yoda is based on one of our prophets. He kind of used one of our prophets as the character to give words of wisdom, as it were. Okay, so let's look at something. We're going to look at something different now. We're going to take a different view. This is, you may have heard this is the concept of what's called the plastic brain. Now, it's not a plastic brain, it's your brain. Our brains are all malleable. And the reason this concept has come out is because of brain scans. You probably know that CAT scans and brain scans have been around for, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. And because we can now look inside the brain, just like we could look inside at broken arms and legs with x-rays, now we can look inside the brain. We can see exactly what the brain is doing. And this is really revolutionary. This is really groundbreaking information, because you can see the brain working, how it works, where it works, which bits of the brain are working at certain times, how the connections are working. And out of these brain scans has come a lot of research. And one concept is this concept of the plastic brain. And what it means is that our brains are shaped physically by what we think, feel, and do. Our brain isn't fixed. It is changing and growing. So if you imagine, if you went down the gym, or if you went home and you picked up some weights and you exercised your arms every day. If you did 10 minutes exercise, lifting a weight, your arm muscles are going to get bigger because you've exercised them. Now, your leg muscles aren't going to get bigger because you've already exercised your arm muscles. It's the same with the brain. Whichever bit of our brain we're using gets bigger, stronger. The connections become stronger. We become quicker at doing it. Another way of thinking about this is people who can play the piano. And if there's any pianists amongst you, you know that when you're learning to play the piano, you go very slowly and you don't quite know where to put your fingers. But when you're competent as a piano player, you don't have to think about it, because all the connections in your brain have already been made. It's all pre-wired. So pianists can be playing the piano and talking at the same time. Their brains are programmed to play the music. So we took a little bit more about this. Okay, here's a quote from Proverbs. "For as he thinks in his heart, so is he." Because this concept of what we do makes us who we are is a gospel concept. It goes right back. Father in heaven knew this before we discovered brain scans. This idea of what you do determines the kind of character you have. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. This is Dr. Susan Greenfield. She's a neuroscientist. She's actually Baroness Susan Greenfield at the moment. And she does some really wonderful talks on YouTube about brain chemistry, about how the brain works. And in one of her talks, she explained how our brains are shaped by what we do and think. And she talked about an experiment that was conducted many years ago. And again, it was connected with pianos. So what the experiment wanted to do was it wanted to take a group of people who had no musical experience. and it was going to teach them how to play the piano over a period of about, I think it was about 6 weeks. So they split this group of people into 3 groups. And what you had was you had what's called the control group, and the control group just do nothing. They're kind of a test. They do nothing at all. But the first group, what they do is they sit in a room for 30 minutes every day, and they just play on the piano. They just play around with the piano. Every day, 30 minutes, every person in this group plays around with the piano, plays with a real piano. Now, the second group, they sit them in a room with a piano, but they're not allowed to touch the piano. They're just allowed to think about playing the piano. So they have to think about it. They don't actually do it. And at the end of the 6 weeks, they get the 3 groups together, and they test them from the beginning, how they've developed with their piano skills. Now, the amazing thing is the control group, they're just the same. They can't do anything. The group that can play, have been playing on the piano keyboard, have improved. But surprise, surprise, the group that thought about playing on the keyboard have also improved their skills. So just by thinking about it, it improved their ability to play the piano. That's the power of the brain. When we input thoughts into the brain, it's changing what the brain is doing. Now, here's another interesting example of how our brains, how the plastic brain works. Now, if I was able to ask you a question, I would ask you, what's particular about London cab drivers? Why would they have bigger brains? And I'm sure some of you put your hands up and saying, well, London cab drivers do a thing called the knowledge. And if you probably don't know, maybe you don't know what the knowledge is. Well, the knowledge is, in order to be a cab driver in London, you have to pass a very strict exam, and it's called the knowledge. And what it is you have to learn by memory all the streets in central London. Don't use a sat nav, you can't use maps. You've got, before you can drive a black cab, you've got to memorize all the streets and routes. So for about 2 or 3 years, cab drivers they'll normally go around on little mopeds, and they drive around the streets, and they work out the routes, then remember the routes, they take notes, and they're like students. They just learn all the roads and all the connections and all the one-way streets in central London. And then they're tested, and they have to be able to tell you how to get from one side of London to the other. So the examiner will say, right, you're on the corner of Tottenham Court Road, Oxford Street, and you need to go to number 4, the Strand. How do you do it? And they have to reel it off their heads. No notes, nothing. They have to memorize it. Now, what happened was, and I'll just read this next bit to you, was, so London cab drivers' grey matter enlarges and adapts to help them store a detailed map of the city. So according to research, taxi drivers given brain scans by scientists at University College London had a larger hippocampus compared with other people. So their brain, that bit of their brain had actually changed size. This is the part of the brain associated with navigation in birds and animals. The scientists also found part of the hippocampus grew larger as the taxi drivers spent more time on the job. So the more they did it, the bigger that part of their brain got. There seems to be a definite relationship between the navigating they do as taxi drivers and the brain changes, said Dr. Eleanor Maguire, who led the research team. She said the hippocampus has changed its structure to accommodate their huge amount of navigating experience. Now, this doesn't just apply to taxi drivers. This applies to all of us in everything we do. So whatever you're doing, if I'm sure many of you aren't, but you might know people who do, lots of people are playing 6 hours of video games a day. Lots of people are watching 14 hours of television a day. Some of you might be reading your scriptures an hour a day. Some of you might be doing whatever it is you're doing, you're having a direct impact on how your brain is shaped and functions. Now, you can't avoid doing something. Even if you lie in bed and stare at the ceiling, that's going to affect your brain. Everything you do is going to affect the connections and the ability your brain functions. So whatever you're doing is having an impact. So if we know this, then you become what your brain is given to do. So if you are become caught in negative things, if you become caught in anxieties or depressions, that's going to have an impact on the way you think. This is the danger of being caught in these negative emotions, because it's going to change the way you think. So the size and function of the brain is shaped by what we do with it. This is why it's so important what we do, what we think, what we read, what we see. And again, the wisdom of the gospel is we've been told a lot of times by a lot of prophets, a lot of general authorities, don't spend your time filling your head with nonsense. Don't watch the films. Don't, do the things. Read the scriptures. Do those things, because that's what's going to make the person you are. That's going to shape you. It's going to shape your character. So it's going to shape your brain, literally shape your brain. So back to this quote, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. And there's two words there that are quite crucial. Thinks, in some quotes it's thinketh, but thinks and heart. So it's what we think, and that implies what we do logically, rational, logical, coherent thinking, thoughts, but also heart. Now that implies emotions. That implies what we feel, which is separate from what we think. We have these two sides, the thinking and the feeling. So what we think and what we feel is going to make us who we are. Okay, I want to just look at another aspect of how we work as human beings and how our brains work. All of us have this internal complex conversation. Like in the cartoon picture there, it says, "You don't understand me. I'm you, Haley, and I understand you just fine. He would like me if he knew me." We have this internal dialogue in our heads, all of us, all the time. You can become aware of it. And often it's between those two aspects of us, between what we think and what we feel. Sometimes there's rivalry between the two. Sometimes we think, as I did this evening, I've just had my dinner, I'm trying to lose a bit of weight, right, I've had my dinner, great, and I'm sitting at the table thinking, I think I'm going to go and get an ice cream. And then I think, no, I mustn't get an ice cream because I don't need an ice cream. That's going to make me fat. And so this internal dialogue in my head is going on. And, my thoughts won and I didn't get the ice cream. But an emotional bit of me wanted to have an ice cream. Now, this battle between thought and emotion is very important to us because, again, there's no goodies and baddies here because we need both. If you think of it rather like if you go to the railway station and you're expecting to get on a train and your train is in the platform and you get onto the train and your train is going to leave the station at 10:30, you're sitting on the train at 10:30, hopefully the train is going to pull out. Well, planning to go on a train, getting on the right train, knowing where the train is going is very much like our thoughts. We think through, we plan things, we have a logical understanding of what we're doing. But our emotions are rather like the engine that's going to pull the train, because emotions convey motivation. It's emotion that really gets us going. So you could be sitting on the train and you need your emotions to pull that train out of the station and take you where you want to go. Because without the emotional drive, things don't get done. People can make incredibly wonderful plans and want to do all kinds of great things, interesting things, but if they don't have that emotional drive, they will do nothing. It's the emotion that takes you to where you want to be. So that's the positive side of it. Now, the other way of looking at it is, if you imagine you go horse riding and you sit on a horse and you sit on that horse and the horse just starts to wander off and he starts to walk and gallop wherever he wants to go. That's like the emotions being in control. They will take you wherever they want to go. Your emotions, if you just followed your emotional stream, would take you in all sorts of odd places. You would skip from one thing to the other, you would go from this thing to that thing, and not a lot would actually get done. Not a lot of kind of logical, practical things would get done. You'd start something, you'd stop something. Oh, I'm bored with this, I'll go and do something else. No, maybe that needs doing, or I feel like I'll do this now, or I'll go to sleep now, or I think I'll have my tea now. You need to get hold of the reins of the horse in order to guide those emotions. So thought and emotion have to work together in unison. They support each other. That's how we get places. You can't work with one or the other. So let's have a quick look at this. So using rational thoughts based on external evidence prevents us from being flooded with irrational feelings of negativity. So let me just sort of talk through that a bit. When you can think through your feelings, when you can use some logic in dealing with what is a very emotional difficulty, you make progress. When you can step back from the emotional turmoil you're in, you can make some progress. You can manage those emotions better from the perspective of thinking. I wish I could ask you if that's okay, if that makes sense. So I hope that does make sense. So I'll say a little bit more about it. So asking ourselves, why do I feel like this? It's a really good question. Why am I feeling like this at this time? And asking yourself, is this feeling really real? You know, is this something that I've imagined, or something that I've kind of created, or something that I expect might happen? Those kind of objective thoughts really help in finding this balance. It prevents us from getting too caught up with those negative emotions. Now I do a training course for student counsellors on that one paragraph. There's a 3-hour training course I do, because there's a lot there, but we're just going to look at it on a fairly simple level. So reality checking is really important. When we're in that high emotional state of anxiety, if we can check reality, it really helps. So I'm going to give you an example of reality checking. So I'm going to say, what's dangerous? So we're going to look at what kind of things are risks in our lives. What's a real risk and what's less of a risk to our lives? So the chance of being hit by lightning in the UK are 1 in 2.1 million. You're pretty safe from lightning. It's not something to get too worried about. So reality tells us that that's not something we need to worry too much about. Interestingly, the most people that get hit by lightning are men. 80% of people hit by lightning are men. It's probably because people get hit by lightning on golf courses, and it's usually men standing on golf courses that are going to get hit by lightning. You can survive it, but it's not very nice. The other things that are in that kind of extremely unlikely area are, well, winning the lottery, being involved in a nuclear accident, being killed by a terrorist. Those things are incredibly unlikely to happen. They're just way out there. Now, this is an interesting one. Being hit by a car or killed in a car accident are 1 in 20,000. Now look at the change in those figures. It's a massive change. It's much, 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 much more likely that we will suffer a fatality in a car than lightning by a large degree. But it's still 1 in 20,000. That's still quite high odds. I don't think a bookie would take many bets on that. If you would choosing to go and put a bet on it. Now, the chances of dying of heart problems is 1 in 6. These are the things that are most likely to kill all of us. The things that kills most people, heart problems. 1 in 6 is a massive jump for 1 in 20,000. That's a huge change in the numbers. The other most likely thing of causing us, killing us, is cancer. So 1 in 6 and 1 in 7. But what's interesting is this last figure. So all preventable causes of death. So all the things that you can have a measure of control over, there's 1 in 25 chance of dying of one of those. Now, this idea of preventable is quite interesting, because that 1 in 6 and 1 in 7 is hugely changed by what we do. A friend of mine is a microbiologist at Newcastle University, and he works on aging. And he says, what causes you to live longer is very simple. It's what you eat and how you exercise. It's as simple as that. He said, even if you stood up for an extra half an hour every day, you would increase your life expectancy. Just doing that one simple thing would increase your life expectancy by about 6 months or a year. So all the things that we can actually take control of increases our chances of survival, increases our chances of healthy life. We actually have a startlingly high control over what happens to us. Now, we cannot control the fact that we might get cancer or we might have heart problems. We can't absolutely control that. Of course we can't. But we can make a difference. And making a difference makes a difference. So let's have a look at this nice picture of food. And if you look at the foods there, you might notice something which I'll point out later. So the most dangerous things we do is how we treat our bodies. The highest risk factor we have is what we do to ourselves. And how do we know that? Well, it's in the scriptures. The scriptures don't tell us how to avoid being hit by lightning. They don't tell us how to avoid hit by a car. They tell us the word of wisdom to look after our bodies. That's the wisdom of the Lord. He's saying, look, if you do these things, you're going to feel better. Your quality of life is going to be better, and you're going to potentially live longer. And if you look at those foods, because the word of wisdom I think it's always an interesting one, because we probably all live it, but it's a commandment that has kind of 3 bits to it. The first bit is the things we should not do, and that's the easy bit. Don't drink alcohol, don't smoke, don't drink hot drinks. Well, interesting, the hot drinks thing is a bit slightly ambivalent, because we know it's tea and coffee, but probably also means we shouldn't take hot liquids. The hot liquids aren't really good for us. We should have warm chocolate, not necessarily hot chocolate. Then there's the end bit where we, the things that we should do, and we should eat herbs, fruits, things like that. The food, like the foods on there. Interestingly, it mentions nothing about dairy products in the word of wisdom. Now, I have a little theory. You can tell me if I'm wrong. The word of wisdom is largely a vegan diet. Not wholly, but largely a vegan diet. It doesn't mention dairy, eggs, milk, butter, sugar, all those things. It mentions herbs, fruits, and grains. Now, meat is an interesting one as well, because what the word of wisdom actually says is only when at times of famine, and eat sparingly. Now, that could mean we don't actually have many famines now. Tesco's has got plenty of food in it. Even under lockdown, it's got plenty of food in it. So eating meat sounds to me like, once a year? Maybe twice a year? So the word of wisdom is quite an interesting commandment, because there's 2 bits of it which are quite clear, the things we shouldn't do and the couple of things we should do. And the rest, really, we have to use our own discretion. We have to use our own thought and logic to work out how does that work for us. Do I eat meat once a week? Do I eat it once a year? Should I be eating these things? What's good for me? And again, the scientific evidence backs up the word of wisdom. It really does back up. The things we should be eating are the things the word of wisdom has been telling us, and now the scientists are telling us. Okay, so by taking control and accepting and understanding the reality of our situation, it allows us the ability to act rather than being controlled by anxiety or other negative emotions. So what I'm clumsily trying to say to you is that there are things you can actually do which make it better. There's actions you can take over a period of time, and that time may be a very long time, maybe years. Some problems in our lives are not easily resolved. Some problems, some difficulties and struggles in our lives go on for a very long time, but we can actively do things that will make it better, that will make it more manageable, that will create situations where we can get through it. Rather than being the slave to the anxiety or the slave to the negative emotions, we actually have a measure of control. We don't have to be done to. Now, you may recognize this. This is the prayer that they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a really inspired program. It started in the 1920s by two men in America, and it's done a huge amount of good. The addiction recovery program that the church uses is really very much based on the AA program. And this is the prayer that they use in we don't use it in LDS addiction recovery programs, but it's used in the AA meetings, which go on throughout the world. There's hundreds and thousands of groups, AA groups throughout the whole world. And this is the prayer. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's quite a very important prayer, very important word to remember. If you can tell that if you're trying to change what you can't change, you're going to lose. You're going to feel defeated. You're going to feel useless. You're going to feel helpless. If you start to try and change the things you can change, you're going to feel good. You're going to feel a sense of achievement, even if you've only made 1 or 2 steps forward. When I cut the grass in my garden, I feel great because I've finally cut that grass and it looks good. This little step makes a big difference to me because I can cut the grass. I can't make the whole garden look great, but I can cut the grass. So what we can do makes a tremendous difference to how we feel and our well-being. Okay, so another way of putting this is you can't stop a bird landing on your head, but you can stop it making a nest. We can't stop ourselves feeling negative feelings. We can't stop ourselves feeling bad or feeling anxious or depressed, but we have an element of choice of what we do with that feeling. We don't have to invite it and allow it to stay. Okay, I just want to do a little thing which I call reality checking, back on this idea of what's dangerous. So I called it an audit. Okay, we can ask ourselves, is this fear real? So when we feel any kind of anxiety, it may be small, it may be large, we can get some kind of scale to it. How bad is this thing? Am I making it more than it is? Or am I thinking ahead a bit? If something's, like I'm sure a lot of you have to go to the doctors, you might have had to have a blood test. So the doctor says, I need to take some bloods. And you think, oh dear, what is that going to mean? What's the results going to come back? Is it going to come back with something really bad? And you can imagine yourself into a really bad situation all by yourself with no evidence. So I think it's keeping that proportion to fears. How real is the fear? And how bad is it? Can I cope with this thing? Is there a way of working around it? One of my clients who's a singer, and she had just set up a studio, because she's in lockdown like everybody else, and she had recorded about, I think it was about 12 songs onto her recording system, her laptop. She recorded all these songs. And I spoke to her the other day. She said, you know what? Something went wrong with the system. I lost all my songs. I lost a week's worth of work. I lost it all. And she was down, and she said, well, I just had to start again. You know, rather than feel desperate about that, she said, okay, I've lost it. I've said goodbye to it. I've made my peace with it, and I'm going to have to do it all over again. So how bad is it? Can you make it? Can you do something about it? And is my reaction making it worse? Very often we can make a bad situation worse. We can make, you know, a drama, a crisis out of a drama, I think is the phrase, isn't it? We can allow it to become much larger than it needs to be. And then how can I reduce the fear? How can I make myself feel better? How can I comfort myself, reassure myself? Okay. Now we're coming to the end. So I've just got a few more slides. Now, this is an old lady on a donkey. I don't know the donkey's name. This comes about because one of my callings has been adult Sunday school teacher, and I've done it long enough to have done the Old Testament twice. I've done the Old Testament twice over. And it struck me so each time, so powerfully, what the Old Testament is about. I think it's one of the things that it's about. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the things. And one of the profound messages of the Old Testament is that God is the creator and master of the universe, and all things are possible. So in the Old Testament, we get these incredible, you know, epic biblical events, don't we? Like the parting of the waves, and Sarah, a 90-year-old, becomes pregnant, and cities are destroyed, and this constant thing about the Israelites having to fight battles. They're always fighting battles. They're always fighting somebody with a funny name, you know, some Ishmaelites or Philistines or Mechelites or whatever they are, all kinds of people. They have to keep fighting battles because the Israelites are surrounded by enemies. And every time they fight a battle, the Lord says exactly the same thing to them. And he does it in different ways, but he says the same thing. He says, look, if you're obedient to my commandments, you're going to win. If you are obedient to me, I can win this battle with an old lady on a donkey. That's, you know, I don't even need the old lady and the donkey. I can defeat all your enemies if you are obedient to me. And time again, when they are obedient, the Israelites have these amazing victories. And you can go through the Old Testament, you can count them off, where they just completely wipe out their enemies, completely destroy them. But other times, they haven't been obedient to the Lord. And what happens? They get conquered. Because the Lord is trying to tell them, I am God, and I can do anything I like. If I want to cause Sarah, the wife of Abraham, to become pregnant, she will. If I want to cause the waters to part, it will part. Everything is possible. Nothing is impossible. And understanding that from our perspective is quite difficult. It's quite difficult for me to understand that the Lord can do anything and everything. Now, if you put that with what we also know, or we should know, is that our Father in heaven loves us, he's our shield, then he can do anything he wants to protect us. He can keep us safe. The only thing that's going to make us vulnerable is us. If we do not shelter under his shield, then we're going to be vulnerable. That's our choice. I just want to read this to you. This is Doctrine and Covenants 101. And they that have been scattered shall be gathered, and they who are mourned shall be comforted, and all they have been given their lives for thy name shall be crowned. Therefore, let your hearts be comforted concerning Zion, for all flesh is in mine hands. Be still and know that I am God. If we really let that if I let that touch my heart, that's the greatest comfort I can ever feel. Be still and know that I am God. So all the anxieties I feel, and I certainly do feel a lot of anxieties, I have a lot of issues that I struggle with, but at the end of the day, this is profound comfort. This is something that we have to cherish as members of the church, because I speak to people, non-members, who don't have that. They have to struggle through their lives without that knowledge. They don't know that. That's hard. I feel really sorry when you don't have that knowledge of the comfort that your Father in heaven gives you and can give you. Your life is a lot tougher. Okay, just to quickly go through this. The gifts of the Holy Spirit. The gifts, he can reveal the truth of things. And he can bring things to remembrance, and he can comfort us. Now, as a psychotherapist, sitting with my clients in sessions, that's what I want to do for my clients. I want them to understand what is true in their lives, which bits are really true and which bits they can disregard, which bits don't matter, which bits are just falsehoods or fantasies or make-believe. We need to know the truth. And we need to remember what's good, what worked, how we achieve things, because that helps us. And most of all, we need that comfort. You know, that sense of being embraced and held at the worst of times. And sometimes it might not take away the anxieties, but it gets us through the anxieties. Because as I say, all of us have to struggle with all kinds of different challenges. You know, there's enormous variety of things we all have to cope with, all kinds of different aspects to our lives that we have to work through. Events, things that happen to us, stress, anxiety, abuse, addictions. We all have to struggle with something. Nobody gets away scot-free. But that struggle is manageable with the Spirit. So manageable with the comfort we can receive. Okay, last slide. Let me just read this to you. So who is in control? He comprehendeth all things, and all things are before him, and all things are around about him. And he is above all things, and in all things, and is through all things, and is round about all things. And all things are by him and of him, even God forever and ever. When I read that verse, it feels like a lullaby. It feels like my Father in heaven is singing me a lullaby, just like on the boat. Don't be afraid. Your Father in heaven loves you. He's here for you. Well, thank you for your attention if you've given it, and that's the end of my presentation. Do I need to do anything?
Thank you very much, Kim. So have you got, Caroline alluded at the beginning of the meeting to the fact that you've received some questions beforehand?
I did. So if I unshare, can I unshare my screen?
Yep, you should be able to.
Yeah, okay, yes. I'm trying to get to the questions.
There you go. I've just,
right,
I've just
great.
stopped sharing for you.
Now, I did have some questions. I'm just going to put them up now.
If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to send them directly to me in the chat function.
Right, I'm looking, sorry, I should have been more prepared with these questions. Here they are. Okay, so these are the questions I've got. I'll just quickly go through them because there's quite a few here. How can we help youth and teens who are suffering from school-related anxiety? I think this is the biggest problem we've got at the moment. I think, we were so concerned about the NHS. I think we've got past that now. I think it really is school children that need that. How can we help them? Well, I think, again, we have to bring a perspective to it. And I think we have to bring a sense of this will pass, things will change. It's not allowing them to think that this is the end of their lives. I think it must be very mixed for those teens who should have been doing their exams this summer. And I think information, clear information, talking to them openly and honestly is the best way to deal with that. But the reality is, there's a lot of unknowns around this area. You know, what's going to happen with exams? How is that going to affect them? Well, the truth is we don't know for sure. So again, I think it's reassurance, good information. I'll quickly go on to the other one. How can I sleep better at night when I feel worried and anxious about the future? This is a really important one because sleep is an extremely good antidepressant. And if your sleep cycle is damaged, you're more likely to feel more anxious and more stressed. So ensuring you get good sleep is very, very important. The trick I've used and I've helped given to other people, and it seems to work quite well, is when you're trying to sleep, you have to be able to distract yourself from the anxious thoughts. You have to get out of thinking about all the things that are causing you the problem. And there's a little trick I do is I build a castle. So it's like, rather than think about things that are happening in my life, I start thinking about, if I owned a castle, how big would it be? Where would the rooms be? Where would the towers be? And it's a similar thing to counting sheep. You're distracting your thoughts onto something neutral. And it very quickly does send me to sleep. And other people have said the same. One person told me they'd think of their fantasy football team. They would think of their best all-time 11 players. And when you start to distract yourself away from the negative thoughts, you can then rest, and then you're much more likely to sleep. So it's distracting yourself and making sure you get that sleep. The next question I've got is, how do I deal with loneliness during lockdown when I feel distant from friends? And that's a YSA question. Again, I think the YSA, again, are having a hard time because that's the group of people who probably socialize the most. You know, they've got a bit of money, they've got some transport, and they're always getting together. And the YSA are always meeting and getting up together in different groups. So I think that has been difficult for them. Equally, I think the YSA are probably the most tech savvy group, and so they hopefully do find ways in which they can make contact. But maybe, you know, a little bit of time on your own is not such a bad thing. And there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. And I think you can kind of practice being alone. And there's some nice things about being alone. It's not forever. It's not going to last. You're going to see your friends. You know, your life hasn't ended. But a little bit of it's kind of coming down from socializing and being more comfortable with yourself might be one of the benefits of the lockdown. That it's okay to be alone. Next question: what if I don't feel as if I have anyone to talk to? I think we're at the stage now where we can go into parks. You know, we can even take a walk, socially distancing, whether it's 1 metre or 2 meters or whatever the rule's going to be. I think we can start to talk to people. And I don't know about other people, but I think the Thursday evening clap, which has now ended, was actually quite a nice way where people started to talk. In our street, we actually celebrated VE Day and socially distanced at the same time, and we had a really wonderful day. So I think there are ways. You have to be creative and you have to be proactive, whereby you can meet people and talk to people. And I think the lockdown is an opportunity to strike up conversations with strangers and you know, on the street as we go out, as we start to be able to come out a bit more. How do I reach out to people to help them when I'm struggling myself? It's actually a good question, because one of the things GPs have been doing for a little while now is when patients come in and say, I'm feeling depressed, the GP will write them a prescription to go into community centres and to do service. Rather than give them a medicine or a medication, They give them a prescription to socialize, because one of the things about feeling depressed is you become very isolated. And one of the ways to counteract that is to actually say, I'm going to go and talk to people. I'm going to go and do something for somebody else. That's a wonderful antidepressant. So if you're struggling within yourself with loneliness, if you can make the effort to reach out, that's a tremendous help. It lifts you out of that kind of self-contained state of negative feelings. So it may not be easy, but it's very worthwhile to make the effort to connect with other people. And the last question I've got here is, how can I balance social media in a way that helps my anxiety but doesn't make it worse? And I know that I think it's actually quite easy, isn't it? If you kind of sort of surf the internet a bit, you come across some pretty depressing things. I remember once, I don't know, I was kind of looking through YouTube some time ago, and I came across a video that it was bad, but it was not bad in a sexual way, but it was actually quite violent. And I won't say what it was because it was quite disturbing, but I accidentally watched it. And it was like this scene on the beach, and then something really awful happened. This killer whale came up. But anyway, you can come across things that can really bring you down. So I think you have to be careful, and you have to draw a line around what you're watching. I think you have to find things that are going to be uplifting and stick to those. The church websites are brilliant. There's so much on the church websites. There's YouTube. It's like everything. It's like a library. There's good and bad and indifferent. There's some wonderful stuff on YouTube, some really uplifting, educational things that you can spend a lot of time learning from. There's stuff on science, on history. There's all kinds of things you can learn from YouTube in a very safe way. So I think you have to draw a line around your social media, what you do, because there's a big danger that you can bring yourself down. That constant checking and constant, of probably trivial things on Facebook doesn't help. I think you have to be more deliberate and more focused about how you use social media. So that's the questions I've got. I don't know if there's any more.
No, that's. I haven't. Oh, an additional question we've had. How can I support someone who is struggling if they are not ready to seek help?
That's a good question, because that's quite right. You can't impose help. That's really difficult. You do have to wait for people to reach out. I think the way you do it is you make them know you are available. You make it clear to them that the door is open. So you say, well, I'm here if you want me. This is my phone number. Give me a call if you want. Or if you fancy doing this on Wednesday, just send me a text. I think you make it known that you're there, and then you have to wait. And that can be quite difficult, because sometimes they don't actually reach out, and that's quite sad. But more often than not, when people, again, it's about control. When they feel they've got the control, they're not being done to, they often reach out. They know there's something they can call or a number they can text to, they will reach out.
Thank you. And just finally, how can I help somebody who has become afraid of going out and seeing people since they have been locked down?
Yes. I actually come across this yesterday. I was talking to a client whose wife has become agoraphobic. She was kind of had those tendencies, but the lockdown has just absolutely, increased that. And I think there's going to be quite a lot of that. Again, you've got to be patient. You can't expect people to, it's been a very strange, we all know this, it's been a very strange situation, isn't it, to be stuck in our houses. It happened very suddenly, but I think coming out of it is going to take a lot longer time. So it's being patient with people, giving them the time and space, but giving them enough encouragement that they don't feel bullied, but they do feel prompted, if you see what I mean. It's giving them the right level of encouragement. and saying, well, you know, you used to go here before, and you used to go out and see this person, and you used to go to the shops before the lockdown. Wouldn't you, you know, when you're ready, wouldn't you like to try that again? So gentle, persistent encouragement. But I think there's actually going to be a lot of people in that position